This is the Financially Simple Podcast, a show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. And now, here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
Welcome to Financially Simple. I'm your host, Justin Goodbread, and today we're going to continue our deep dive into the subject on building your team, building your employees for maximum value growth. Now, I'm going to approach it a little differently today, and I've titled today's episode, How to Build the Best Company to Work For. So I want you to think about it from an employee's perspective. We're going to get into how to hire people, how to train people, all those things. But today I want to look at it from an employee's perspective, but I want to give you some stats today and lay the groundwork for the how-to part of this episode in the next series. So way back in episode number 10, I made the statement. I said, I was taught as a young kid to love people and use things. Love people and use things. I can remember my dad saying that. Son, we love people and we use things. We don't use people and love things. We don't mix it around. You know, so many times in our world today, I know you've seen this. We often see people chasing things, the love of money, the love of cars, the love of fame, glory, whatever it is, and they abuse people to get that. It's like whoever you can step on to get to where you want to be, it's okay. That's just not my belief. It's not who I am. I believe we ought to love people, and things really, at the end of the day, don't matter. I have a client that I was meeting with yesterday. They lost their husband recently, and that individual, this gentleman, he left this earth and left the things that he loved most, his family and kids, behind. He left the things that he had worked for his entire life here. And now the kids are going to use it. Mama's going to use it. And ultimately, whenever that generation leaves, the things that we work so hard for, they just ultimately go away. So they really don't matter at the end of the day if we really think about it. So when we're thinking about this, love people and use things, it ultimately boils down to the culture of our companies. Ultimately, the culture is driven from top down. I received a call from one of our consultants yesterday. They said, Justin, I am working with a doctor and the office manager. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But they said, I'm working with a doctor and office manager, and the office manager is undermining the doctor. The office manager is undermining the employees and the team. That's a cultural issue. And I said, I got to be careful. Have you ever seen this from the owner of the company? He said, well, yeah. So that's a cultural issue. I don't know about you, but I don't want to work in an environment, spend the days away from my family, my farm, my tractor, the things I love, doing something for 40, 50, 60 years that I end up hating. So many Americans are doing that. Most Americans, and I would say it's not just a Western problem. I would say it's a global humanity problem that most of us don't like what we do. I love what I do. I wake up every morning excited, ready to go, and I'm tired some days, but I just love what I do. And I think it's a cultural thing more than anything. It's driving a passion for greater cause. I read this quote from Aon Hewitt, and it says, the best companies to work for engender high levels of employee engagement and commitment because the leaders of these organizations focus on meeting people's basic needs and satisfying their growth needs. They focus on helping their employees feel happy and fulfilled. But I think in that statement, it lays out two things that are very important to us when we deal with culture. Culture ultimately is are we meeting our basic needs? And do we have opportunity for growth? So if you take that statement and we're dealing with this thing of culture, we have to identify that every human, whether it be the boss or the janitor, every human has a basic need. And we could argue what those are. I have a need to be heard. I have a need to be felt wanted, to feel valued. I have a need to provide income for my family. I have a need to be able to provide a lifestyle that I want to live. Now, is that a need? To me, it is. I have a certain lifestyle I want to live. But I also have the ability to want to grow bigger and greater. I know people who do not want to grow. They're content where they are right now. I have clients that are away. I have friends that are away. I have family members that are away. And that's no problem. That's just where they're at. But Aon does a great job saying that it engenders high levels of employee engagement and commitment. because ultimately the leaders are trying to help them reach their basic needs. So that's a culture that I want to generate within my organization. There was a study done by Wells Fargo that was printed in the Wall Street Journal back in 2016. And the summary of the study was this. They said, while value-driven culture is perceived as important, and I think we'd all agree with that. We would all agree that the value-driven culture, having firm underlying values within our organization, is extremely important, especially at driving the bottom line, is what this particular study went to say. Said it's very important, or it's perceived important, particularly in driving the bottom line of the company. Only a quarter of companies have a formula or a process to measuring culture within their organization. So let's dissect this. The title of the show today is How to Build the Best Company to Work For. If Aon Hewitt, the statement they make is we are engineering high levels of employee engagement and commitment because we're trying to meet their basic needs and satisfy their growth needs. Okay. And we realize as a civilization that culture is invaluable. We realize that. And we really know that the culture of an organization directly affects the bottom line profit, the profit of the company. I think it's amazing that only a quarter of companies have a formal process of measuring culture. I think that's interesting to me. Now, I got to be honest with you. When I first started reading into this some years ago, I was like, how do you measure culture? How do you even do that? Do you say on a scale of 1 to 10, do you like the person or do you like your coworkers? Well, partially, but there's a lot more to it. And we're going to deal with that in the next episode. But I find it interesting that this Wells Fargo study says that only a quarter of companies actually have a formal process. Think about it in this format. Would you like to have a 901% growth in your company? 901% growth. So I'm bringing a study in from the Harvard Business School, and professors John Cotter, C-O-T-T-E-R, and James Heskett, H-E-S-K-E-T-T, and I probably butchered their names, but these are two Harvard Business School professors, and they did a landmark study with 207 companies in the United States, and they researched over an 11-year period. And here's what they found. They found that revenue growth in companies with cultures that strongly valued, and here's their exact quote, strongly valued all the key constituencies, they put in parentheses, the customers, the stockholders, and the employees, and leadership from managers at all levels. So basically they're saying those companies with cultures that strongly valued the team, okay, customers, everybody involved, if they strongly valued it, they grew at an average of 682% compared to those who did not. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The appreciation in the actual stock, the stock of these publicly traded companies that valued the culture, that had valued a strong, positive culture, had a 901% greater return than the companies that did not. That's amazing to me. So whenever I heard culture for the first time, and I got to get on a soapbox here, whenever I hear these business consultants come out and they say, what's your culture like? Or what's your values or mission statements? I'm using that tongue in cheek because if you listen to me for any length of time, you know, I have very little patience for people who come out of the corporate world who want to tell small business owners how to run their job and they've never ran a business before in their life. I have a hard time with that. Okay, soapbox off. I'm back in the real world over here. But I think it's interesting that we can actually drop and quantify that companies who focus on culture actually have a larger increase in valuation. That's what we're after here. We're trying to figure out how we're going to grow the value of our companies. Friends, the one area that's make or break in our areas is our team. So we have to focus on the culture within our companies. Now, here's an interesting study. 78% of business owners believe they have a great culture. You may ask yourself now, you say, Justin, well, we have a good culture. We don't fight. We don't have people late for work. We get the job done. So we turn a profit. We have a good culture. Here's the other part of that study is only 25% of business owners measure it to see if they actually do have a good culture.
You are listening to Financially Simple, destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner.
So as I'm thinking through these statements and these concepts, I got to step back. I'm sitting here going, man, does it really matter? Yeah, I get the fact that 901% is the difference on big companies. I get that. On their stock price valuations. I get that. But does it really matter for my small business? There was a study done by Deloitte on the human capital trends in 2016, and it said that 86% of leaders, now this is across multiple different companies, okay? 86% of leaders believe culture as an important or very important issue. So when I read that, I was like, well, maybe I'm just an odd duck. Maybe I'm just a business owner who says this is mumbo jumbo, fluffy, princess fairy tale things. The culture really doesn't matter to a small business. So I read the Deloitte one saying, well, 86% of business owners think it matters. Well, maybe I'm one of that 14%, which I could be. Then I read a study that said from Duke or Columbia Research, it said 91% of executives believe that culture is vitally important to their business. Oh man, so I just moved from 14 to 9% minority, 91%. So now if I don't believe culture is the minority, man, I'm having problems. I read another study. It said 84% of leaders believe culture is critical, not just important. Now they're saying critical to the organization's success and profitability. Man alive. Then I read another study that said 92% of board members say that investing in culture has improved financial performance. So I got to tell you, whenever I'm sitting here reading through these episodes, I often ask myself questions like, dude, do you really believe what you're talking about? Because I get so frustrated when I hear mission statement and values and culture because it feels like it's not manly things. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm being weird. But I'm looking at this, I'm going, man, am I missing the boat? Is this just new age mumbo jumbo? Maybe I can put it to a different way to myself. So I'm researching this and I found something that I can relate to. This is my financially simple culture breakdown. I get all the studies. I get them. And I have so many studies and so many statistics that say we should really value culture in our businesses. And part of me as a business owner says, when do I have time to worry about somebody's feelings? I get it. So you're probably like me saying, amen, brother. I'm with you. I want you to think about this. I grew up on the ocean. We had boats all around us. Several of my friends had boats. We had boats everywhere. There was on these shrimp boats, the big boats that drop nets in and pull shrimp in out of the estuary there in the southeast Georgia coast. We had these things that you could see on the bottom of shrimp boats. You see them a lot on docks, on the piers of docks. It's a thing called a barnacle. Now, if you've ever dealt with the ocean, you may have seen barnacles. It's this crustacean that grows on just about everything, and it just sticks to it. And if you're not careful and you hit them, they'll actually cut you. They're pretty sharp. They're little crazy boogers, okay? But barnacles are so small that oftentimes they can be overlooked. And compared to these boats, these things are just micro small. That's kind of the way that culture works. If I look at that big, gorgeous shrimp boat out there, or I look at a big yacht, I see all the things above the water. I can see the revenues. I can see the accolades. I can see the news stories. I can see the profitability. Those are all the pretty things. Those are the sexy things of business. But that barnacle sits underneath the water. Oftentimes it's invisible. You can't see it. And you're like, Justin, what in the world are you doing? Well, here's what I want to talk about. There was a study done, and it was done on the Navy's ships. And they talked about the barnacle. And the barnacle does the following. On a boat, on a ship at sea, the U.S. Navy predicts that a barnacle creates drag. It creates a problem where the boat doesn't move through the water as fast as possible, and it creates about a 10% slower speed. Think about that. Some of these Navy vessels, they're trying to push them to 15, 20, 30 knots. Maybe they're trying to get them to 40 mile an hour on some of these fast approach. 10% is a 4 mile an hour difference. Just this little small thing that sticks to the boat. Now, some of them get pretty big, but many of them are the size of an eraser on a pencil. They're not large. If you've ever been watching like somebody on a bicycle, if I'm doing a triathlon, if I bend over, try to get my body aerodynamic, I can get a little bit better speed. If I put my body up in the air, stand up almost like riding with no hands, the wind hits your chest and it slows you down. The same thing. It's a drag effect. Now here's another one. Not only does it cause a drag of 10%, it also causes 40% more fuel and maintenance. So for the U.S. Navy, that's $500 million to $1 billion dollars annually. You may be starting to get my analogy now, okay? This little unseemingly minor thing is now costing potentially $1 billion a year annually, according to the study. It gets even worse. Biofouling or infecting other biospheres in Scotland costs $2.6 billion. So it costs all sorts of money. Just this little small thing. The other thing it does is on a boat, on a ship, you have a rudder or you have a bow that sits in the water. And these things, if you leave them alone too long, they begin getting larger and larger and larger. And eventually it clogs the rudder. Let me put it to you a different way in our business terms. It prevents the boat or the ship from going in the direction that it wants to go in. Or to move it, it becomes very hard to turn it very fast because of the barnacle. Ultimately, the only way that you can really get some of these larger things fixed is you end up having to dry dock them. You end up having to take them out of the water and do a scraping effect. Now, there's some ways you can remove them underwater. There's that way. I've seen people do that in real life. But nonetheless, it becomes a pain if you don't deal with it. The longer you leave them alone, the bigger the barnacles get, and the bigger the problem becomes evident. So I give you that analogy to lay the framework for culture. If the culture of your business is not cohesive with the vision, the mission, and your overall objectives, if the objective is to build a company that's worth selling, if it's build a best-in-class company, if the culture is not best in class, then you could experience the same things in your business that these ships experience. It's the same effect. You can end up having slower speed time. It may take longer to get the projects done because of culture issues. You may have a problem with fuel maintenance. You could end up spending more money maintaining this ship because you don't have the right efficiencies within your culture. You could lose the ability with bad culture of changing directions as fast as you need to change. So I give you all of this to say, friends, the answer to my question, does building a good team matter? Yeah, it does. So how do you build the best-in-class company? First, we have to recognize culture. We have to recognize the importance of culture. In our next episode, we're going to deal with how do we examine your current culture. Until then, friends, I just want to thank you for joining us on the podcast. Hey, do me a favor. Go out to iTunes and leave us a review. We've gotten several reviews, and man, it is helping in the charts. It helps more people hear this. Every bit of information I help clients with, I put on here on the air the best I can. I don't charge for that. But a good iTunes review helps me spread the word even more. We've got a book coming out. I can't wait to tell you about it. We're so close to getting it finalized. I can't wait to share it with you, and that'll soon be available. And if you like the podcast, share it with a friend. One of my other buddies said, dude, I didn't know you did podcasts. I said, yeah, check them out. He's like, dude, you got 100 episodes and they're really good. I'm learning stuff. I said, sweet. He goes, I didn't know you knew all this stuff. So neither did I. So leave me a review, share it with a friend. And like I say every week, life is hard. It is. Life is good and life can be frustrating. Dude, the stock market, the last 3 weeks. If you haven't been paying attention to it as I record this show today on October the 26th, the month of October in 2018 has been brutal. Brutal. Look, money does not have to be frustrating. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all go out and make it a great day.
You have been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. The information in this show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor.